And welcome back to the Interfaith Roundtable here on SCTV. I'm Cantor Mark Perman of Farmington Valley Jewish Congregation in Simsbury. Very happy to have you as part of the program. If you have any suggestions about future guests or ideas for the show, or feedback, comments, negative, positive, I'd love to hear from you. Just email me at mjperman9@gmail.com. That's mjperman and the number 9@gmail.com. Well, Dr. Yehezekel Landau is Associate Professor of Interfaith Relations, and he holds the chair in Abrahamic Partnerships at Hartford Seminary here in Connecticut. He has a Master's in Theological Studies from Harvard Divinity School, and he holds a DMin from Hartford Seminary as well. A dual Israeli-American citizen, he lived in Israel for 25 years. He's worked extensively in the fields of interfaith education and Jewish-Arab peacemaking. He directed a religious peace movement in Israel during the 1980s, and from 1991 to 2003, he was co-founder and co-director of the Open House Center for Jewish-Arab Coexistence and Reconciliation in Ramla, Israel. Did I say that right?
Yes.
Yes. At Hartford Seminary, Professor Landau directs an interfaith training program for Jews, Christians, and Muslims called Building Abrahamic Partnerships, and I'm honored to have him as my special guest on the program. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
You know, when people in the media portrays different religious faiths, especially Muslims now, there's always that stereotype and there's that emphasis and focus on the extremist aspect of the tradition. You're working to build understanding and cooperation and a sense of how we're common, our commonality. How hard is it to counteract that stereotype in the work that you do, and are you able to do it?
It is an uphill struggle because the media, as you mentioned, do sensationalize the news for their own commercial reasons. And it's not only if it bleeds, it leads, but the most vocal, militant, belligerent voices command the attention of the media. So there's some kind of unholy alliance between the perpetrators and those who make their exploits into the headlines and the lead stories in the news. So it pollutes our consciousness, and our awareness is skewed. So if you take Islam, for example, the extremists are disproportionately covered, given media attention. So part of my work when I bring Muslims together with Jews and Christians is to counteract that skewed misperception of Islam and Muslims. And by the same token, because of negative stories out of the Middle East, especially Israel-Palestine, the view of Jews in many quarters, especially among Muslims, often can be a negative stereotype. So that has to be countered with accurate information, especially encounters with living, breathing representatives of whichever tradition gets misrepresented.
Now, you said something that for many Jews already would be controversial, and when people refer to Israel/Palestine, I think most Jews support the two-state solution, but some would argue that there is not yet a Palestine for reasons that's not Israel's fault. Talk a little bit about that mixing of the religion and politics, and how do you keep the two separate, pure, and from kind of infecting the other? You know?
It's impossible to do that. Yeah, that would be more than messianic. The religion and the politics contaminate each other, so you can't depoliticize the spirituality. Unfortunately, I wish you could. Over there, it's easier in the United States, and you can't take the religion out of the politics. So everything is supercharged.
So the Pope received some criticism when what? He referred to Palestine or said, or what was it? There was some controversy around his recent visit to the Middle East.
Well, anybody who steps into this minefield and tries to be fair to both sides is going to get flack from the partisans in one camp or the other. I was privileged to be in Jerusalem, still living there, when John Paul II came in 2000 for his Holy Land pilgrimage. And there were also politicized events, and his message of peace, dignity, security for everybody got twisted by various people who were also trying to recruit him, so to speak, for their side, for their partisan agenda.
Right. Correct me if I'm wrong. My simplistic understanding is if the moderates on both sides could come together and negotiate, you could have a reasonable solution. It's the extremists on both sides, whether it's Hamas on the Palestinian side or it's the more right-wing factions within the Israeli government, that always seem to thwart that process and want to keep things in this perpetual limbo because they're not willing to compromise. And those who are radical on the Palestinian side really want Israel gone. Those who are radical on the Jewish side would say that they don't want a Palestinian state. It would threaten their security. So can they deadlock this forever?
And some on the Jewish side would like the Palestinians
Okay.
to disappear as
Right.
well.
Okay.
So I want to make two more general statements to pull back the lens, so to speak. It's not just that people can't make room for each other on the map yet. It's deeper than that. They can't make room for the other's identity as defined by that other side in the hearts and minds and spirits of the adversary, the so-called enemy. So what I've been trying to do there, based in Jerusalem and Ramla at this Open House Peace Center and at Hartford Seminary, is to provide a spiritual foundation for any political discourse, let alone a solution. How many states, we may end up having 2 Palestinian states if the Palestinians want that. It's not clear that Gaza and the West Bank will hang together as one sovereign entity. It might be 2 provinces federated. That remains to be seen, but we're far away from drawing borders and deciding who's sovereign where, whose flag flies where. The whole atmosphere is not conducive to deep sharing of identities, convictions, aspirations, spiritual longings, and a sense of belonging to the land. So we get hung up on the technicalities, the surface issues, which will have to be negotiated. Refugees, Jerusalem, borders, all of those questions. But the deeper issues, which I think have a spiritual dimension, need to be addressed. It is a political conflict where religion or spirituality gets hijacked and manipulated for negative partisan purposes, and that causes me a lot of anguish. That's why I do this work, because I think God is not served, and the love and justice that God calls us to be and do gets totally undermined.
There's a quote, I don't know if it's true, from Abraham Lincoln during the war, where a general came to him and said, Mr. President, let's pray that God is on our side. And he said, no, let us pray that we are on the side of God.
Amen. I would say.
If you talk to a lot of people, potential members of a congregation or general folks out there, you get this sort of sense that there's a feeling that organized religion breeds conflict and has bred war for centuries. It's even in, the famous John Lennon song, imagine there's no countries, imagine there's no religion too. In a sense that has been more of a destructive force than a positive force. Today people speak of, and I do too, I'm sure you do, spirituality. That's what defines us. If we could get rid of all the cultural, religious identity and stop the conflict, we could all have a commonality of purpose. Yeah, I would sense you wouldn't agree with that on some level. Would you, or how do you feel about those?
I would take it. I understand the yearning to distance oneself from institutionalized religion if it's associated with division and conflict, which it is.
But by
a
its
lot
very nature,
of the time. Its very nature is ambivalent. There is a book I use in the course I teach called Religion, Conflict, and Peacemaking. It's by Scott Appleby, The Ambivalence of the Sacred, that demonstrates across the board, all around the world, that religion is both a force for conflict, even hatred, even murder, as well as a force for healing conflict, for noble expressions of love and mutual caring and solidarity. So, and that's not just by saintly people, that's by ordinary people who live righteous lives, the vast majority. So it's a question of balance, it's a question of perspective. So if another issue is whether people are solo artists in their religious lifestyle, there are some people who could live as desert hermits, and they don't need a community. Most of us, I think, need to belong to a fellowship of people with whom we can worship. We don't have to agree theologically, but somehow our confessional, devotional expressions in word, in song, and silence, somebody said singing, and you're a cantor, so you would know this. Singing is like praying twice or doubly.
Yes, I have that expression on my piano. Yeah.
So that to sing along without being harmonious with other people, you lose something. And I think in our relationship to God, we need that empowerment, amplification.
Yet there's something, as you know, called the Pew Report, which many folks may not be aware of, that suggests that organized religion, not just Judaism, but is falling down. I mean, younger people are not joining synagogues, churches. They don't need that. They don't want it. They have the internet. They find their friends. So that sense of joining the community, supporting it financially, is dwindling. And a lot of places are being left empty and struggling to merge. So how do you see that trend? You would think that with all the problems in the world, people would turn more towards religion and spirituality, but there seems to be a turning away from it statistically.
From attendance or membership,
membership
in these houses of worship.
Right.
That's true. So, but there are new spiritual entrepreneurs. I think of Rabbi David Ingber at Romamu congregation in the West Side, Upper West Side of Manhattan. There are new expressions of spirituality and new frameworks that are being created to embody them and express them. So this is nothing new in the history of religion or religiosity. New forms, you know, as the New Testament talks about old wine in new bottles. So the eternal truths get expressed in new ways.
So when you say new, certain innovative expressions of religious identity, for example, Messianic Jews, who many of us who are Jewish respect, but believe that they're really Hebrew Christians, not Messianic Jews. That term is contradictory to a certain extent if you're talking about Jesus. How do you see that as a interfaith, am I putting you on the spot, interfaith person, teacher, professor?
It's fine.
Is it something you can see as a legitimate expression of faith, or something that you as a Jew have trouble with? Maybe you can fill in people a little bit on that whole Messianic Jewish...
Okay. There are three expressions for this kind of phenomenon. Jews who believe in or are devoted to Jesus. Either as a teacher, a super teacher, an avatar, or as a Messiah, or the Messiah, having come once and will come again, or as Lord and Savior, which is already crossing the line to Christian belief and Christology. So whether they're called Jews for Jesus, Hebrew Christians, Messianic Jews, I let them define themselves. My issue with that whole stream or group within the Jewish community at large is to respond in this way. This is, in a way, going back to the first century of the Common Era, where Jesus and all the apostles were Jewish. So it's trying to recreate first century Judaism in a way. That's sect, the Jesus movement within Judaism. I'm not going to say it's illegitimate, but it's never going to become mainstream Judaism because we have 2,000 years of rabbinic teaching to help us form our normative Jewish path. So this is a group that somehow doesn't find that satisfying or spiritually relevant or nourishing. And for them, putting Jesus at the center rather than the sages or the other prophets and sages of the Bible and the Talmud, to see him as the central figure to follow and even to worship, that's almost surely going to remain a fringe. So there's about 19 centuries in between that I personally feel need to be part of the core of what Jewish identity is.
There's a book by, maybe you've read it, I read parts of it, but the Rabbi Robert Levine of Rodef Sholem in New York called There's No Messiah and You're It. And the gist of the book, as I understand it, is that we shouldn't be waiting for the coming of this messianic figure. Basically, we have to embody it in our actions, and we have to bring it about through our doing. So look in the mirror, you want to see messianic potential, it's you. God created you in God's image. go out and do it. So, but then traditionally more Orthodox Jews would say, no, we are waiting for a descendant of David who is a personal Messiah. When the Messiah shows up, Jews will say hello, and Christians will say welcome back.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you feel about
I
that?
usually say, let's wait and see who's closer to the truth. And I suspect we're all going to be radically surprised when the messianic culmination or fulfillment of history comes. Now, whether it's centered on one individual or it'll be more global in terms of, we'll see it happen live on CNN. People like Christian Amanpour and Wolf Blitzer will cover it live, and then we'll have a greater sense of whether our prayers have anticipated what actually comes to pass. So I think we should practice a messianic ethics along the way. I think that's what Jesus models for us in a way. And for me, Sabbath observance every week, for example, is a rehearsal for that messianic fulfillment in history. So 1/7 of our lives are lived in messianic time to transform the other 6 days of the week into what we pray for and anticipate in our local communities and in our families every Shabbat.
Talk a little bit about the building Abrahamic partnerships that you're doing at Hartford Seminary for people of different faith traditions, Jews, Christians, Muslims, and what's the basis of that, and what comes out of that that could really influence and affect people across the larger spectrum.
It is a learning laboratory for between 25 and 30 people for a whole intensive week. It's a total immersion experience in Jewish, Christian, Muslim encounter. There's an academic component because you can take it as a credit-bearing course at Hartford Seminary, and there's an experiential dimension which happens not just in the classroom but over meals and during break times. The meals have blessings from all three traditions. So we try to really understand one another up close and not just through books. We have along the way 3 fishbowl exercises is what we call them, where people express their feelings about one another in a guided, facilitated way that keeps it safe. And then we process the feelings that come up along the way. We have a methodology we call ouch and wow, which we use to encourage people in real time to express either something that irritates them, and then when we deal with their issue on the spot, there are more intrafaith ouches than interfaith ouches. Usually when somebody speaks, instead of using I language, kind of imperialistically about we Christians or we Jews or we Muslims believe or do, and then others say, speak for yourself, please. And the wows convey the expressions of delight, surprise in learning, either you do that too, wow, I didn't know that, or wow, that's so different and beautiful in its own way, different from my tradition, Sabbath observance, for example, or the Hajj pilgrimage, or monastic, disciplined living. All of these specific, unique expressions of spirituality that each tradition adds to the whole. So in my view, my conviction is the holy whole is greater than each individual tradition that is part of it.
I do some blogging on Facebook, and because I'm a frustrated radio talk show guy, one thing that comes up a lot is that people seem to understand that there is a mainstream Islam and there's an extremist point of view. There has been criticism, and I, to be fair, think we can levy that criticism against our own people too, that we're not strong enough to disavow our extremists amongst us and say that doesn't represent, bombing a building or attacking people, civilians, does not represent Islam. What happened in the murder of Yitzhak Rabin in 1995 by an extremist or radical, however you want to call it, Jew in Israel, doesn't represent Judaism. We sort of go and we sort of hide from that. Do we need to disavow our extremists amongst us more publicly?
We need to do that. Yes, we have to publicly correct these misrepresentations, these really egregious, appalling misrepresentations. We also have to educate ourselves about what the other tradition really teaches. There are websites, isna.net, for example, that demonstrate that mainstream Islamic authorities, clerics, teachers, scholars, disavow, condemn terrorism, indiscriminate violence in the name of any tradition, including their own, especially their own. They also feel this violates sacred precepts in Islam, but we never really hear about this. And I have fellow Muslims, I have Muslim colleagues who can't break into the media because the media professionals, when they call them for background information, said, "You're too moderate, you're too peaceful. Can you lead me to a more belligerent, militant representative of your tradition?" Because we want to create an adversarial dynamic on the air.
It's good for ratings.
It's good for ratings, and it just perpetuates these terrible distortions. So, and then religion gets typecast as complicit in all of these crimes, these political crimes.
And that's true across the board, the different networks, and well, they have to come on this show, and we have as many listeners. But Dr. Yehezekel,
that's the sad thing.
Yeah.
That's the sad thing. CNN had a 9-hour series called God's Warriors with Christian Amanpour.
Yeah.
Not even 15 minutes on God's religious peace builders.
But it's funny you mentioned her twice, because a lot of Jews consider her a very controversial figure and believe that she and her reporting for CNN and her coverage has been pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel in her outlook. Do you see that kind of bias in the media with people like that who take one side?
I don't want to single her out. We live with a 24-hour news cycle with a lot of cable channels putting out consistently one-sided ideological takes on the news, on what is happening. So I think we are then obligated to get our information from many sources and make our own judgments and not just be spoon-fed all the time.
Talk a little bit, it just occurred to me that you would be someone to talk about, all these discussions about guns and all of these, killings taking place, and you being a religious person, these random shootings, the young man in Santa Barbara, and these young people who are going in this direction of doing these terrible things. And of course it starts the gun control argument, it starts the why are people on all these medications argument. From a religious spiritual point of view, would you argue that some of them are not being nurtured religiously or spiritually in their lives, and that they're growing up with an empty life, and that some of that leads to this kind of disregard for human life, a lack of spiritual training, religious training, guidance at home? It's not just guns or violence in the media, it's more complex than that. What are your thoughts on it?
It surely is. We have mental illness, we have spiritual illness and hunger rampant in this society. I believe there's a continuum psychologically, sociologically in our society. These people are at the far end. They carry out what perhaps other people fantasize. We have very violent video games and movies. We have a culture saturated with deadly violence. This is very serious. These are not games. So it's not clear what pushes people over the line to actualize their fantasies of revenge, of needing attention, to go out as some kind of hero in their own warped imagination. So I won't give a general psychoanalytical judgment about all of these people, but our culture is spiritually bereft.
When we were in the shtetl, when we were in the lands where we were repressed, yes, life was much harder, yes, our freedoms were less, but you can make the argument that the family life, the Jewish life, the community was stronger. So that freedom, in a sense, is a blessing, but it also has a level of curse. I don't know if the founding fathers anticipated that freedom of speech would mean you could pretty much put anything out there on the internet that you want. Not that they could envision what the internet would be. So in a sense, do you need new guidelines beyond the Constitution? Because the Constitution couldn't speak to those things in the 18th century. You know what I'm saying? And do we need more thought processes about freedom and what we can put out there that's really destructive or constructive?
I think most people would agree that legal norms, statutes, including articles of a constitution, they are necessary but far from sufficient in molding the consciousness and culture of a society. So they are the minimal standards of justice, but trust, love, solidarity, sharing and caring for others is beyond whatever legal norms we might agree on as a minimum standard. So we have always had an individualistic society here, the Horatio Alger myth of the self-made person, at odds with a real communitarian ethos, which Jews and Muslims tend to adhere to more, because the norms, including the legal norms we have, are norms for a whole community. So when you have these lone gunmen wreaking havoc on whole communities, it's a sign, an extreme sign, that something is missing in our sense of communal solidarity.
Talk briefly, I know I didn't give you enough time, but your 25 years in Israel. You can't do 25 years, but talk a little bit about your life there and the Peace Center you've developed there, and do you ever feel the urge to go back and be there?
I go back once or twice a year, and so even though I'm living in Connecticut, spiritually I'm very much still rooted in Jerusalem. My son, 26 years old, lives there, so there's a family connection all the time. The work I've done is been trying to work for peace from my religious convictions and aspirations. I realize this is against the grain, that most people working for peace are non-observant or secularized people, and most religious people are either isolated, self-segregating, or they are chauvinistic and militant. So I try to find a middle ground that is spiritually grounded and also humanistic and humane, and having the golden rule rather than Jewish or Muslim, Israeli or Palestinian rule dominate. So the golden rule relativizes all our claims and beliefs. So the Open House Peace Center in Ramla is a micro-laboratory of a house of two families representing a homeland of two peoples, which people can find online. They can visit virtually and then hopefully visit when they go. friendsofopenhouse.org is the website there.
Dr. Yehezekel Landau, Hartford Seminary. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for you.
My pleasure. Thank you for joining us on the program. We'll be back next month. Once again, any thoughts, insights, reflections, feel free to email me, Cantor Mark Perman, FEJC Shalom, at mjperman9@gmail.com, and have a great one. See you next time.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.